Basics of welding. I actually learned how to weld when I was 15. I'm 40. I am 54 now. And I'm going to talk to you guys about the reason I'm making these videos is I noticed 5150 MXVW. If you're not subscribed already, you want to get over there, hit the button. He's trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. And he's going to start doing his own projects, and I'm like, wow, that's awesome, dude. You got to start somewhere. So anyway, so I'm going to talk to you about the different types of welds you can do and what kind of machine to have. It's just going to be some basic information, and what you're really, the principle of what you're doing is, and the types of things to look for on your welding project. And this is all pertaining to sheet metal. So welding frame and stuff like that, VWs don't have frame, so there's nothing really that thick. Probably the thickest thing on a VW is 18 gauge, so it's really not steel. There's stuff like that, but I can weld steel or whatever, it doesn't matter. That's actually easier, I think, because you just turn the heat up really hot and go at it. Sheet metal is the hardest thing to weld. So with that being said, this is very, very thin sheet metal. This is like 24 gauge. Okay, and I'll use this for some patch repairs where I'm going to do overlay, where you're basically putting one piece of metal over another piece of metal to weld up a gap or an opening. That's not always the best way for your repair. It is the strongest way, but to look aesthetically correct, most of the guys are going with butt welding today. And you notice that I don't do that much of it. I do some of it when I need to, but I don't do that much butt welding, because typically my projects that I'm doing as a daily driver quality job. I'm not trying to do them as a full show job where you look at every edge of it and it's perfect, because if you make it full show and then you drive it, then you've done all this work. Some guys are putting 5 years into one project, trying to make it full show. And I just don't want to give up that much of my life. And I want to be able to drive it and enjoy it. And, yeah, I'm always worried about getting in wrecks, but I'm not going to worry about it if I get a little door ding or something like that happens. It's not as big a deal to me. So anyway, so this is two types of welding: is butt welding, where you butt two together, and overlap welding, where you overlap one over the other. And usually when you do that overlap type thing, you want to use a little bit thinner gauge maybe than what's on there, because you're going to have a lot of filler to try and put in there if you're trying to do repairs. So the type of welder that I like for doing most sheet metal repairs, the best type of welder is this one over here. The best type of welding is actually TIG welding, but TIG welding is actually a lot more difficult to do. I would prefer somebody learn on MIG and then eventually get a TIG welder, and that's much better for doing your butt welds and stuff like that, because you're able to control the heat and melting a lot better. I actually learned from a set of these torches, and that's how I started welding many years ago. Well, before they really had MIG welders, they had a few of them, but most guys didn't have them. But if you're just starting out, probably the best welder to get is the cheapest welder is, and one of the best ones is actually a MIG welder. And they have cheap ones at Harbor Freight Tools that are called MIG welders, but they're actually, they don't really have any way to put gas on them. So you want to put your 75-25 gas on there when you're welding steel, and you just go down. I always ask them for 75-20, 75%. I don't know. I don't even know what it is. It's argon and something mix. 75-25. You put that on there, and then the gas is actually the best way. They have something called a what is it called? Flux core welder, and basically it has a little, the wire has flux on it so that you don't need the gas. and they do work okay. It's a little harder with thin sheet metal. You know, if you're running this really thin stuff, then it's really hard to use. So anyway, so the best one, if you can get one, is a 220. 220 volt. If you have 220, if you don't have 220 around, you can start out with a 110, and make sure you have a really thick extension cord if it's not right near where you're plugged in, because it will draw a lot of current. So anyway, you're almost going to have to learn. So you just basically, you hook up your ground. You hook up your ground here. Let's see. Hook up your ground to one side, and then you know what you're trying to do, and then that's grounded. So now this is going to be your hot end. So when you touch the two together, it strikes an arc. So when you push this button here on your welder, the little wire shoots out when the machine's running, and it'll hit there and start the arcing process. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to create heat and add wire, which is, this is already feeding the wire at the same time. It's pushing the wire out. That's why it's a wire feed MIG. Okay, and you're pushing the wire out, and you have two controls here. You have wire speed and the heat selector. So with sheet metal, you're going to be pretty, cold, but you want to be able to get hot enough to where it actually penetrates. Now, when you know you've got penetration, you almost need to burn a hole through it first, and that's okay. That's part of learning. Is when you see on the other side, let's say I weld this side, and I flip it over, and you have really good penetration, you're going to flip this over, and you're actually going to know, it's going to look like you're going to see the weld, burning through on this side a little bit, just barely, and on this side, you'll see your actual weld. But you'll see on the other side of where you were, a line where it's kind of burning and melting the metal. That's good penetration. So those are basically all you're doing with the process is you're getting the material hot, you're melting the two pieces together, and then you're filling it in, the melt, with rod, which is this right here, wire. So when you pull the trigger, it does it automatically. It just shoots out the wire, fills it in as you go, and that's basically how that you weld. Now, when you weld sheet metal, it's really easy to burn through. You're going to find yourself popping holes in it, and that's the trick, is turn the heat down a little bit, turn the wire up a little bit, try and not get it to do that, but still have that penetration on the other side. That's the trick right there. And it's like I said, it's a lot more difficult to do than it seems, especially on sheet metal. If you're doing real thick metal, you can just crank up the heat really hot and just melt that sucker, and it won't pop through as easily. But when you're going on sheet metal, you're going to keep on burning holes when you first start. So, at least for you guys today, they have those auto darkening welding helmets. Really a must-have. Makes it so much easier. Back in the old days, we used to have to get a regular helmet and flip it down. Nobody had the other ones, and then you lose where you're at. Like you set up your weld right here, and you go to pull the trigger, you flip your head down, and you could be over here. So then you just stop for a second, and you go, oh crap, I got to move back over here, and it was really hard to see. So but today at least you have the auto darkening welding helmets, and it's a lot easier. But what you're going to want to do is, when you first start welding sheet metal, is not try and weld. If you're doing overlap welding like this, you don't really need to weld the whole thing all the way across. You can do spot welds along here, little spot welds. Okay, and you can do about a 1/4 inch apart. But when you're butt welding, okay, so there's parts I was looking at his car. He's going to have to do a lot of butt welding up in the front under the hood. And you want the same thickness metal as what you got. So, you know, one of the easiest ways to do that is take an old car. You know, if you've got somebody, I used to fix a lot of wrecks for people and stuff like that. I don't do that anymore, but I used to save all the hoods and stuff like that, and I would just cut pieces out. Or you can go to the sheet metal supply and get them. And then you put your two pieces together like this, and then what you want to do is spot weld, say here, and just do a little bit of spot weld. Don't do a lot, because if you get it really hot, then it'll start to warp. Just do a little spot weld. Maybe do one up here, get it all lined up, you know, in place with spot welds. And then then what you do is you just start spot welding. Spot weld, let it cool. 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 And you just work your way all the way along the areas until it's all filled in. That's really how you do this butt welding. It is going to warp quite a bit. That's why a lot of guys are using TIG, because the TIG, you can control the heat a lot better, and it's a lot more difficult, because what you're doing with a TIG welder is you're basically getting the area hot, and then with your other hand you're adding rod to fill it in, instead of having it come out all at once with the MIG welder does. So you pull the trigger and this wire just starts coming out. I'll show you real quick. I'm not going to weld anything, but you can just see the wire just comes out as you pull the trigger, and then you use that to fill it in. So if you see that you're burning through, you want to turn your wire speed up, maybe turn your heat selector down a little bit, and play with those things and keep watching it until it doesn't burn through, and you've got one side welded and the other side looks almost like this side. You see a line right where you were, really like burnt, a melted line. That's when you know you've got a good penetrating weld. So anyway, that's the basics, very, very basics. Hope it works out. Hope you guys can learn it. I was looking on YouTube and I really didn't see much on this. So, all right, talk to you in the next video.